they are seeing in real time the benefits it has for their defense to sometimes get beat one-on-one. For every 1 or 2 times that Jalen Brunson gets a bad matchup and, oh no, he gives up a pretty easy 10-footer, or he gets dusted off the bounce and the help isn't there, there are 5 times when the guy settles for a tougher mid-range shot or a 3 isn't created. I think this was huge for the Knicks. I don't believe that the Knicks need to be a championship level defense. I think their offense is so amazing that they could settle for league average or slightly above league average. But if they defend like they did last night in terms of tactically and strategy, we're looking at a top 10 defense without getting in the way of their amazing half-court offense. This is arguably the best team in the league.
This is Hot Hand Theory. This is a podcast where we talk about the NBA and break things down from an analytical perspective. I'm your co-host, XJ. As always, I am joined by my brilliant co-host, Geoff. Geoff, we haven't been on in a little bit. But, I've been in the middle of a move. My internet's pretty bad, so hopefully we're able to maintain and complete this episode. But we're going to get back. We're going to get things back on track pretty soon, just like the Knicks have. The Knicks have gotten things back on track, obviously. Following the Knicks fan and analyst panic that ensued after losing 6 of 9, I believe, leading to various pundits to suggest that the Knicks aren't title contenders this season, I guess due to some apparent roster flaw or because they haven't had enough time to build chemistry. This led us to talk about the last time we were on and talk about how this team is in fact a title contender and should be held to the standards of a title contender, and how the roster is extremely well constructed, and they're looking like that right now. Geoff, what are you seeing from the Knicks? If you want to talk about their back-to-back 143-point scoring games, a decimation of the Memphis Grizzlies, who we've covered in detail and I believe are a top 3 team in the Western Conference. Do you want to talk about their defense and something that you posted a great thread about on the Hot Hand Theory Twitter account? Where do you want to start with talking about this Knicks team with where they are right now?
Can we talk about your brilliant transition, just your podcast hosting skills? That was just wonderful to me. It reminded me of, this isn't a laughing matter, but I don't know if you ever saw this, but after Kobe passed away, this guy was talking about it on a pod. He spent like a half hour talking about the sadness of Kobe passing away. He's like, that shit was rough, man. And speaking of rough, and then he went into an ad read.
I did not see
when
that.
When you did that transition, that's the first thing I thought of, and I was just like, God damn it, man. Okay, now we move on to basketball talk.
That your transition was even better. Great.
It was perfect. I think we should talk about the couple areas where the Knicks have really, I don't want to say turn their season around, because the season's pretty much been good for the Knicks for the most part all season. They've had some rough stretches, but I think if you look at like every single 10-game stretch, they haven't really had a bad 10-game stretch. There have been some bad games. You could argue that the Grizzlies game was really their first signature win. They've had a pretty nice schedule for the most part throughout the season that could have been buoying them. But I think that we've seen 2 areas, one in the Grizzlies game and one the last couple games, where they've really improved. The first area is I feel like they've leaned into their bench more. And look, they don't have a good bench. We can talk about this for forever. The Knicks bench is weak. Deuce McBride is a good bench player. Aside from him, you have a couple guys who some nights you'll get helpful performances, other nights you're not going to, in Precious Achiuwa, Cameron Payne, and Landry Shamet. But as we've discussed, the bench isn't there to be consistently great. They're not there to, be all-stars every night. Nobody should expect Landry Shamet to go out there and be better than Mikal Bridges. That's not his purpose. His purpose is to be playable enough so that the team, the most important players like Mikal Bridges, like Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart, OG Anunoby, and Karl-Anthony Towns, so that these guys can get to the playoffs and be reasonably healthy and rested for the most important games of the season. And what I found encouraging in the last few games is you've started to see a little bit more balanced minutes. And you've seen stretches where the bench hasn't performed that great, and Tom Thibodeau has left them out there for a little bit longer. Let them spell those starters with a little bit of rest. Would I like to see a little bit more staggering so that maybe these bench players can be elevated to play better and play even more? Absolutely. I don't think we need to see all four of the bench players plus one starter be their only time on the court. I think that's a flawed strategy, but I do think he is running that lineup more and getting more comfortable with it, which I think in turn is helping the starters. We're seeing Mikal Bridges play 28, 30 minutes in games, which would have been crazy a month ago. And wouldn't you know it, he's had some of his most effective games. I think you could argue that the game against the Grizzlies was his best game of the season. He played, I think, 30 minutes. He guarded Ja Morant almost the entirety of the time Ja was on the court. He was awesome against Ja at the point of attack. And we're about to talk about my second point and why that was so important. But I think that, cutting back his minutes is helping him be more effective in the time he is out there on the court. And I think that, of course, playing less is going to make it more likely that he's out there playing his best in a few months when the playoffs start and the games are most important.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's a great place to start because I think there's a couple ways you can look at this. You can look at kind of minutes per game in terms of their macro effect, in terms of how they make it more or less likely that the player will be able to maintain a certain pace or rate of play throughout the rest of the season, and they're increasing or affecting their risk of injury. And then you could also look at it in this micro perspective of like, how well will they play towards the end of the game or at various points throughout the game if they're kind of getting worn down during that specific game. So just looking at it in terms of a one-game sample. And I've always thought that it's really, I think that your bench has to be really, really bad in order for your best players to be still better than your bench players if they're completely dragged out and like have played 40 minutes in the game, and your bench players are completely fresh and just coming off and ready to give you a strong, high intensity 5 to 10 minutes in the game. So to me, I think that's a crucially under discussed portion of this kind of minutes per game conversation, something that's come up in some of our conversations recently. And I really don't know like what the actual perfect threshold point is, because what you see in playoff situations is that what you see in playoff situations is that rotations really get whittled down and guys play 40 plus minutes every night, sometimes 43 minutes. You'll see players average 42, 43 minutes throughout a whole playoff series and a playoff stretch. But I wonder why that's the case if during the regular season, if we are seeing some very significant improvements, in my opinion. I think Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby as well have both played some of their best basketball this season. I think, to be honest, for those two players, the last 4 games in which the Knicks have won in a row, those have been their best games of the season, their best stretch of 4 games throughout the entire season for those two players. I don't know if it's exactly correlated back to the minutes issue or to being more well-rested or some of those other aspects that you talked about. But I think it's important and I think it's relevant. So I mean, maybe this is tangential, but I wanted to ask you this question because this is something I've been thinking about. Why in the playoffs do you guys play like so many minutes if we see during the regular season, in some cases, it does appear to be that when they're fresher, they play much better and on a much higher level, and the bench is able to play as well as those guys. Let's say the 39th Mikal Bridges minute is not going to be as good as the 4th Deuce McBride minute. And I genuinely believe that. I think you'd have a tough time arguing the opposite. So why do guys play so much in the playoffs, do you think, in this case?
I think it comes down to, I think you make a really good point there. And I think it comes down to a phenomenon that's prevalent throughout sports. And you think about football, people ask, why did you punt there? And the coach would say something like, well, we trusted the defense and we thought the defense was going to stop, and oh well. But underneath that, Jesus, is by punting, the coach is almost removing responsibility from himself. It's now on the defense. There is, in terms of job security and whether you can be blamed, you can shift the blame to, well, the defense need to get a stop there, or at least historically, maybe not so much anymore that there's no more data. but at least historically, that's how the conversation went. I think that there is a negative connotation, and it almost looks bad on the coach if you're in a playoff game and you have bench players out there and the other team has Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown on the court, and you just got by some short-term variance. I think even if you could argue long-term, it would all be the same, or on the net, you're actually making a net positive decision. The percent time it goes bad, it looks worse when you don't have your players out there. So I think subconsciously, that's why coaches do it.
I think that's a great answer. And I think it's true. I think that the optical kind of perspective, looking at the game, it does look worse if Jason Tatum's out there and destroying like campaign. And you're just like, what happened? This is why the Knicks lost. I totally get that. But I do think that we've seen a lot of teams run really deep benches, play guys fewer minutes than we've ever seen. The Cavs are one of those teams. The Grizzlies are one of those teams. The Pacers are one of those teams. Play really deep rotations, and players are looking fresher. And I don't know if it's just a matter of for trying to reduce injury or actually an approach that will be continued throughout the postseason where guys can play their maximum ability, give their maximum effort, and still be fresh to close games at the end. I think this could be a difference that we see, and I don't know whether the Knicks will have an advantage or disadvantage with the fact that they haven't done this much. I do think it's encouraging that they've done this of late. I know that some of the reason for the fewer minutes for some of these players that we're talking about is because the Knicks are kind of destroying teams. Such an impressive victory over Memphis, who I think is a great team in the West, not a good team, but a great team in the West. But I wonder how that's going to play out kind of long-term in the playoffs. And this is just a tangent that kind of came to mind when you were talking. And I think it's a really interesting thing to just keep an eye on.
Yeah, I think Cleveland is gearing up and ramping up for the playoffs. I'd be very surprised if they maintained these minutes. I think guys like Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley will play 38 plus minutes a night in the playoffs. At least especially Mitchell, maybe not Garland. And Mobley's weird because he has that stagger with Allen, but I think Mobley has emerged above Allen as the big that is the more important big on that team. I could be wrong about that, but and that could be matchup dependent too. There could be just certain matchups where they like Allen more. So I guess I should just say strictly Donovan Mitchell. I think Donovan Mitchell is gearing up to play a lot of minutes in the playoffs. And I also think that guys like Sam Merrill, it's almost a chicken egg thing, because a guy like Sam Merrill, even Ty Jerome, who I love, have these guys been super effective? Absolutely. Are they going to be as effective playing a team that always has its starters on the court all the time and not getting the luxury of playing other bench units as much? I'd imagine their effectiveness is probably going to go down. So I don't know if the Cavs can do that. Like, I think that if the Cavs went to the postseason and had a matchup against the Knicks or the Bucks or the Celtics, and they tried to, we're going to limit Mitchell to 30, 32 minutes, I do think that these lineups that have been so successful for Cleveland in the regular season, even against good teams like the Celtics and the Knicks, I don't think they'd be as successful in the playoffs. I could be wrong about that, though. I'm definitely open to being wrong about it, to the point that you made, that maybe part of why Jerome is so important to this Cavs team is that the 18th minute of Ty Jerome is as good as, if not slightly better than, the 38th minute of Darius Garland. And maybe him letting Garland settle in at 32, 34 minutes, even in a playoff game, maybe that'll just make them the peak version of themselves in the playoffs.
Yeah, I generally agree with you. I think it's like a middle ground for me. I think just using Donovan Mitchell as an example, he played 35 minutes a game in the regular season last season, and now he's down to 31. I would be really shocked if he spiked from 31 to 38 in the playoffs. I think that actually does increase, based on research that I've seen, that actually would increase his risk of injury to a really significant degree, to have such a high leap. So it is possible that Atkinson kind of ramps them up as they get closer to the playoffs and they slowly start to tick up to 32, 33, 34 minutes. But if we don't see that happen, if we see this maintain this kind of 31, 32 minutes throughout the regular season, I would be very shocked if it just suddenly ramped up and spiked to like a 38, 39 minutes per game situation. So I think we could see it go to kind of like, and I know that for our listeners, we're kind of talking about, it seems insignificant. It seems like minuscule. We're talking about 1 minute here, 2 minutes here, and it seems like nothing. It's like, what does it matter if they play 34 minutes or 36 minutes? The same thing. The research actually suggests that there's like a major difference on a minute by minute basis in terms of over the course of a regular season when we're talking about minutes per game and how it factors in. So I think it's a really interesting thing to think about. I will say this. We're talking about, Mikal Bridges minutes kind of coming down a little bit. OG Anunoby over the last 5 games has played 37 minutes per game. So his minutes are actually up of late, and they have been over the last 7. I think it's around 38. I know they played like an overtime game within that, I think, but his minutes have been up, but he's been playing much better, in my opinion. I think he's been excellent defensively. We're seeing some of his best defense, and obviously he had an offensive outburst recently as well. Do you think that there's any like schematic reasons for some of these improvements that we're seeing? To me, to my eye, Mikal Bridges has been a player who has played really good defense at times, has played really poor defense at times. His isolation defense has been solid most of the year, but has come on of late. And I think we're seeing a similar trend for OG and Anunoby as well. Do you think that these are schematic things that are happening, or do you think that this is just these guys are kind of like locking in at this point in time? Like, what is the kind of reasoning for you?
I loved how in the Grizzlies game, I thought this was one of the first times all season that Tibbs fully leaned into the strengths of his roster and also made an effort to emphasizing the game plan of the opponent and trying to take away their strengths. So we covered Memphis earlier this season. We sang their praises. They're a very good team, as you said earlier. Memphis's biggest strength is its pace. Memphis will try to run any team out of the building. The Knicks are a prime candidate to be run out of the building. That is, we've had players say in post games, we knew that if we just kept running, the Knicks would, shorten their rotation and they'd get tired. And this is another area where lengthening the rotation helps. The Knicks were prepared to meet the Grizzlies' pace. They looked on defense to take away the Grizzlies' first action. They knew they were going to try to create a good look early in the shot clock. And what Thibodeau did that he hasn't done historically is he was willing to live with his guys getting beat one-on-one. Was OG Anunoby on the back line roaming defensively like he always does? Yes, he is their Band-Aid. He is their safety net. But he was meticulous with when he was overhelping or pre-rotating and when he stayed home. And what the result there was a lot of one-on-ones, even with Jalen Brunson. This is a big development because you and I have been saying all season, just let Jalen Brunson cover the guy. Like, it's okay. It's okay in the mid, even if you think it's a big disadvantage, even something as insane as Jason Tatum on Jalen Brunson. Of course, you want someone behind Jalen Brunson, but so if the result is going to be Jason Tatum shooting over Jalen Brunson, that's a win for the Knicks against the Celtics. That's just absolutely, I said for the Knicks, yes. That is a win for the Knicks against the Celtics. Absolutely a win. No doubt in my mind that the Knicks would sign for that 100 out of 100 times in, across the 48 minutes. Of course, you could make an argument there are certain situations, I guess, where that's not what they would sign for and they want something worse. But the point is, you cannot be so terrified of a single player, creating a great look from the mid-range or getting to the basket that you are willing to give up anything else. That is a doomed strategy long-term. If you just put your team in rotation before anything actually happens, you're asking too much of your defenders, and the result is going to be an open three every time. The ball movement in today's game is too good. The strategy is too good. Everybody knows that if you're not going to get a dunk or a layup, that the next best shot is a three. You're not like tricking opponents into turning it over or to taking a worse shot. You're just forcing them to take a better shot. And I thought what the Knicks did against the Grizzlies was incentivize the Grizzlies and force the Grizzlies into taking a lot of bad shots or a lot of mediocre shots they haven't been taking all season. And that started with The Grizzlies expected advantages to be created when Ja Morant penetrated from the perimeter, and those advantages weren't created because nobody helped off. He would take Mikal Bridges down, and Mikal Bridges would slide with him. There would be no help. There would be Knicks tied to all other four players, and what is Ja Morant supposed to do? It's just either a reset or a force of a bad shot. You saw a lot of these poor shots from the short floater range, contested short floaters, and the Knicks had Towns, they had Hart waiting to get those rebounds. This was just a dominant defensive performance that has long-term macro implications, because if the Knicks are willing to do this against a team like the Grizzlies and see the benefits that it has, who aren't they willing to do it against? Why wouldn't they be willing to do this against a team like the Celtics or the team like the Cavs or a team like the Thunder even? They are seeing in real time the benefits it has for their defense to sometimes get beat one-on-one. For every one or two times that Jalen Brunson gets a bad matchup and, oh no, he gives up a pretty easy 10-footer, or he gets dusted off the bounce and the help isn't there, there are 5 times when the guy settles for a tougher mid-range shot or a three isn't created. I think this was huge for the Knicks. I don't believe that the Knicks need to be a championship level defense. I think their offense is so amazing that they could settle for league average or slightly above league average. But if they defend like they did last night in terms of tactically and strategy, we're looking at a top 10 defense without getting in the way of their amazing half-court offense. This is arguably the best team in the league.
I love everything you said. I really want to just build off of a few points that you made that I think were really great. First, I want to say I think that overhelping has been a big reason for why the Knicks defense hasn't been good. Like in of itself, and I don't know if we consider that a schematic issue or a philosophical issue. In my opinion, it's more like philosophical, where the kind of habits that are being drilled into these players are like, don't let really good isolation players get shots in isolation over weaker defenders. And so I think overhelping has been causally an issue for the Knicks defense, not just their personnel, not just having Karl-Anthony Towns as the rim protector who's really bad as a rim protector. And in my opinion, I don't have data to support this. So, I'll caveat this by saying this is like my personal speculation. I feel like the Pistons game was an eye-opener. And obviously, they still had some really rough defensive performances after that game. But I do think from the Pistons game, there was more talk than I am used to hearing about how kind of silly it was, the defensive coverages that they were playing towards the end of the game, just giving up wide open three-point shots from quite literally likely the best three-point shooter in the league and maybe the world. Like like if your defense and your defensive principles are such that the shot that the team is getting when they need a good shot at the end of the game is a wide open three from the guy who's the best at it in the league, then that is a red flag of like something's wrong, red alert, something needs to change. And so I don't know if it's directly correlated to that, but at least to me, that was the first time I noticed like a lot of people really commenting on how much of a problem that is. For the Grizzlies game, you made a great point about how, they expected mismatches and advantages to really occur. They expected to get advantages from their drives. And when there were no advantages, it was like, what do I do now? A lot of times they took bad shots, but a lot of times they just turned the ball over. They just threw terrible passes. And I think it was instinctive, Geoff. I think it was like passes I would see from Bane and Ja to players who would normally be open when help would come, but help didn't come. And so those players were covered. It was almost like a quarterback who has run through a play several times and normally their receiver is open, but like, whoa, this linebacker's there. He's not supposed to be there. And then they just throw it directly to him. And then the commentators are like, well, he must have just not seen him. I think it's almost like they're just assuming that guy's not there. And that's what it felt like with Bane and Ja and even Scottie Pippen Jr. And they just seemed to be throwing passes like they assumed would be open passes, and they were. And that's because the help wasn't there. And I really just think the Knicks have a variety of very good to elite defenders. And I include as a very good defender, Karl-Anthony Towns, which I know is a lot of people would really be upset by. But I think that he's good at things that he's good at, and he's really bad at things that he's bad at. But I think the things that he's bad at are things that you can really kind of limit in how they impact the team. Bridges has been up and down defensively at times, but at times he's also still shown he's an elite isolation defender, and he has been that of late. And for Towns, he is a really good individual defender, in my opinion. He can guard wings relatively well. We've seen him kind of guard wings on the perimeter, and he's one of these situations where his defensive reputation, and a wing may have him one-on-one and then try to do their kind of dribble combinations, and he's still there, and they're like, why is this guy still there? Doesn't he suck defensively? And it's like, well, no, not at this. He's okay at that. And so in my opinion, when you play a team like the Grizzlies, who we know, Geoff, Memphis runs the fewest pick and rolls in the league by far, and actually is one of the lowest pick and roll frequency teams in recent memory of the NBA. I think that really plays into the Knicks' hands defensively, because now you don't have to worry about putting Cat in drop, because you don't have to worry about as many screen rolls, and he's now in an advantageous position. He's an excellent post defender. We know that from his time in Minnesota guarding Jokic on the block, one of the best guys who was able to guard Jokic without help. And he was not in a position where he's at this disadvantage where he has to make a decision as a drop defender, coming up too high, knowing when to drop back and defend a lob, knowing when to guard the ball handler and let his rotation, his help rotation kind of take that big. He doesn't have to make those decisions, which plays perfectly into the advantage of the Knicks. And this is also the last thing I want to say. You brought up the Celtics as well. I think this is what I've thought before the season, which is why I think the Knicks should, on paper, actually be a good matchup for the Celtics, or the Celtics should be a good matchup for the Knicks, and why I think they should be considered as having a better chance to beat the Celtics in a series than the consensus, because the Celtics actually beat you in isolation. It's not with threes that they magically produce out of thin air and they just they just start shooting three. No, they beat you with isolation. They force you to bring help, and that's how they get those threes. They put Tatum and Brown in isolation with a matchup advantage and so much space that it feels like they're on a larger court or something. It feels like they're playing on a larger court because that's how much space they have around them. Sure, they do on-ball screens more than Memphis, but that's oftentimes just to get the matchup that they want and to attack downhill in isolation with an advantage and with no rim protector. So if you put the Knicks in a situation where they're allowing these isolations and the Celtics aren't able to get off their wide open threes and they have to beat guys one-on-one consistently, and maybe you add some switching schemes where you pre-switch Brunson more often, as you've talked about, and you kind of get him out of those isolation situations. And now it's like, okay, beat OG in ISO, beat Mikal Bridges in ISO, beat Karl-Anthony Towns in isolation repeatedly. Go ahead. And in my opinion, that's not a game that the Celtics want to play. So this could be really big. This is a difference that we see in approach moving forward. Guys are staying home a lot more often. To me, this could be a turning point in the season.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up the Celtics, because that was where I was going to go with this. Not with the Celtics specifically, but the Celtics are the end goal for the Knicks, beating the Celtics and winning a championship. There is strong correlation between how the Knicks guarded the Grizzlies and a switch heavy scheme. Because if you're okay switching and the offense isn't immediately creating an advantage off of the screen, you are almost negating the value of a screen. You immediately are forcing an ISO. We see it all the time with the Knicks. Like Karl, even in the Brunson Towns pick and rolls, Towns will set a screen for Brunson and he'll pop, and the opponents will just switch easily. And what it turns into is one of Brunson or Towns going at the mismatch in isolation. That's great because both are amazing isolation defenders, and more valuable, they're so different that they force opponents to have two very wildly different defenders to guard both of them. It's impossible to have a defender on your team. Not impossible, because maybe Caruso, maybe Drew Holiday, maybe peak Drew Holiday, but it's very unlikely that you can have a defender who can guard Brunson effectively in isolation and just switch on to Towns and guard him effectively. What the Knicks have against this matchup against Boston specifically is two, arguably three guys who can toggle between their three best offensive initiators. I'm not saying that they can handle Tatum, White, and Brown, but those three profile similarly enough offensively that there's no reason that you wouldn't put OG Anunoby on any one of the three of them for a given possession, or Mikal Bridges, or Josh Hart. This correlates so perfectly. This has to be the path for the Knicks in these matchups, because if you just close your eyes and imagine a world where the Celtics are creating a flurry of threes and it's because of Knicks mishaps. What are the mishaps? It's Porzingis setting a screen and then popping, and them trying to guard that in drop coverage because they're so afraid of the ball handler getting to the rim, and the third hedge defender doesn't get over in time. Or it's Tatum creating a half advantage and the Knicks pre-helping and just seeding a rotation and a three being created. Those are the two ways. But if you just live with switches and live with one-on-one isolations and are okay with Jason Tatum getting to the rim from time to time, are okay with Jason Tatum getting a nice, easy 10-footer turnaround from time to time, the threes are going to dissipate. This just has to be the path forward for them.
Yeah, you just made an incredible point, and I'm going to round back to it. I do want to point out that Nick's best performance against a good offense, or a top-tier offense, I would say, so far defensively, has been against the Grizzlies in this most recent game. They gave up 96 points per 100, which is 91st percentile in the NBA in terms of defensive rating. That was their best performance by far defensively against a great offensive team. Obviously, they've had better performances, but that's been against like the New Orleans Pelicans and the Orlando Magic without like Paolo or without Franz, or the Toronto Raptors, not really potent offenses. Their worst offensive performance, obviously, of the season, it's not even close, was game 1 against the Boston Celtics, where they gave up 164.6 points for 100 possessions, which is probably with the All-Star game level defense is what we saw in that situation. And I think if you want to go back and watch that game, if any viewers want to go back and watch that game and look at how the Knicks defended the Celtics versus how they just defended the Grizzlies, it is night and day. It is an approach difference that is on display. If you just watch those two games and juxtapose the way that the Knicks defended in each of those situations, it's not even close. And then if the Knicks defended the Celtics the way that they defended the Grizzlies in that game, they would that outcome would not have happened. It wouldn't be possible, because you would have a lot harder time scoring 160 points for 100 possessions out of isolations and mid-rangers than you would out of wide open 3-point shots. And so that is a major difference. And that's talking about the first game of the season to the most recent game of the season. Something that I think and hope that we see, for the Knicks' sake, continue along that path, because I agree with you. I think it has to be the route forward. You mentioned about the fact of the Knicks' two different players, probably best isolation players, even if you want to call a post-up an isolation, which I consider very similar. Their two best isolation players being so different is so helpful, rather than their two best isolation players being so similar. And I think that that's an incredible point. I think that it makes it a situation where if the Knicks play a team like the Celtics, where they're both kind of doing similar things, we're switching everything, we're trying to minimize the disadvantageous matchups that we have, but when we have them, we kind of stick with them and we don't overhelp. We stay at home and just hope that we can kind of hold court and not get destroyed from twos and, our opponents getting to the rim. I think the Knicks can definitely win that game, because the mismatches that the Knicks would have out of those switches would be so much more dramatic, with Brunson against a big who will have a lot more difficult time defending him, and with Karl-Anthony Towns against a small who will have a lot more difficult time defending him. Even if it is, Derek White, I think would struggle in that situation. And I know they put Drew Holiday on him, but I don't love that matchup for the Celtics either. So I think that that's a very significant difference in terms of the team build and the roster construction. Now, if the approach, and I think Joe Mazzulla is an excellent coach and one of the best coaches in the league. Now, in terms of the approach, that's what's going to define and dictate how that actually plays out, in my opinion. And I do hope that the Knicks are kind of learning from this and are evolving their approach to defense, because I think it's going to make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And I think they'd go with Holiday. And I just the Knicks play the Celtics Saturday night. You brought up what a good coach Mazzulla is. I just can't wait for that game. I know Mazzulla is not going to show his entire hand. Maybe Thibodeau won't either. I can't say that as confidently for Thibodeau because everyone knows his propensity to try to give it all, whether that's correct or incorrect. This is what he gets credit for is he's built a culture where regular season games are playoff games. I do think Mazzulla will hold back a little bit and save some of his strategies for if they meet in the playoffs. Right now, with the way things are set up and the lead the Cavs have in the East, this is looking like this is going to be a collision course. Like an inevitable collision course. The Pacers and the Bucks have made their way to the 4 and 5 seeds. The 6 through 10 seeds, all of a sudden, like there's kind of a gap. I know the Magic have gotten a lot of from us too. The Magic are a very good team. They have 2 great young players. They still haven't figured it out on offense. And I know Paolo and Franz are coming back from injury. Suggs is coming back from injury. I could see them giving Boston or the Knicks a little bit of trouble. But besides Orlando, I do think that we're looking at a very good chance at Boston playing the Knicks in the 2-3 matchup, regardless of who has home court. And I don't know, it could end up being one of the great series a Knicks fan has gotten to see in their lifetimes, especially with think back to some of those 90s matchups. I know that they had the grit and the intensity, those Knicks Heat matchups, but just from a tactics and skill and level of play, this could legitimately be the highest quality basketball we'll see in our lifetimes. And that's so exciting to someone like me who loves the Knicks and loves basketball. I can barely keep it together just waiting for this game on Saturday, because the truth of the matter is we're such macro thinkers, and this might be off-putting to some people, or it might be okay, can you just talk about that? But the Knicks have created a paradigm, XJ, where not that these games don't matter, but they just need to get to the playoffs healthy. This team is elite and it's good, and they need to prove a couple things, in my opinion. They need to prove that they can get to a playoffs healthy, and that when they get to the playoffs healthy, they have the open-mindedness and preparedness to adjust when the series calls for it. And that's why this Grizzlies game was so encouraging, because the opponent did call for it. It called for schematic and approach versatility, and they embraced both of those and just completely ran the team out of the building. That is what you want to see, and that correlates so strongly to a playoff matchup. And the truth of the matter is the Knicks are going to probably lose some games that they aren't supposed to lose the rest of the season. Maybe they'll win a couple games that, maybe they'll win a game at Boston, or maybe they'll win at Cleveland. I truthfully, unless an extreme outlier happens, like the Knicks lose 10 in a row or they win 10 in a row and surpass Cleveland, I just don't know how much the rest of the season even matters aside from staying healthy. It's just get through the season healthy, get one of these top 3 seeds, and let's see what you got against, Orlando in round 1 or Miami in round 1. And if you make it to Boston, let's see what you got in that dream matchup.
Yeah, it's funny because we're we're kind of U-turning back into, or boomeranging back into our perspective, which is that this regular season for the Knicks is to get to the playoffs healthy, to kind of limit the minutes played, to kind of try different approaches, to come up with that approach versatility that can be deployed in a playoff environment, to work on different lineup combinations to see which are your strongest ones against particular types of defenses, or which are your highest ceiling lineup combinations. A lot of experimentation, because we just know that this Knicks team is so good. We just know that they are. There's no... I mean, people had doubted that for a little bit just because they went on a little bit of had a rough patch, but everybody's going to have a rough patch. The Cleveland Cavaliers are going to have a rough patch. The Oklahoma City Thunder are going to have a rough patch at some point. And so it's fine, but I totally agree with you in your perspective. And I agree with you about the Knicks Celtics matchup. I actually am really curious about this now that, everything has been kind of pointed towards the Knicks have to beat the Celtics. Everything is about the Celtics. How do we get past the Celtics from a Knicks fan and analyst perspective? At this point, are the Cavs the worst matchup for the Knicks? I know that, people are thinking the Knicks have the Cavs stopper and they have Mitchell Robinson. And once Mitch comes back, Mobley and Allen will be squeaking in their boots and he'll get every offensive rebound. But that really is, there's a lot of contingencies there. And that one is that Mitchell Robinson comes back and is Mitchell Robinson and is healthy and is able to play at the level that he's played at. That's no guarantee. We're talking about getting into February. The initial reports were that Mitch would be back towards the end of December, early January. That's clearly not happening. And I don't hear even rumbles about him almost being back or being on the way back. So I think that there should be some hesitation about how healthy he'll be, how much he'll play, how much he'll be ready and ramped up for the playoffs, and what Mitchell Robinson they'll get. And also, the Cavs bigs are clearly better than they ever have been. Mobley is somebody that I've really doubted in terms of his development, and largely because of his lack of ability to shoot. And while he's shooting well, he doesn't shoot at high volume. But aside from his shooting, he's gotten better at everything. He's much stronger. He plays I was concerned that he wouldn't be strong enough to play a full-time 5 role without another big kind of next to him. He showed that that's not the case. He can absolutely hold it down from the 5. He's so versatile with his ball handling, his passing, and everything he does defensively is very crisp and sharp, and he's good at almost every aspect of the defensive game. I'm not sure that you're going to have Mitchell Robinson come back and just bully these guys into oblivion like we've seen them do in the past. And if that's not the case, the Cavs had almost every weakness for the Knicks. They run heavy screen and roll. All they do is run pick and rolls where they had divers who are cutting to the basket hard in terms of Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley. And that's going to create a lot of issues for Karl-Anthony Towns if he's involved in those pick and rolls constantly. And on the other end of it, the guys who are running those pick and rolls, Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, those are 2 of the elite pick and roll orchestrators in the entire league and 2 of the great shooters off the dribble in the entire league. I'm not sure that this is a good matchup for the Knicks. And not only that, I'm not sure. I'm starting to be convinced that while I think Boston is better than Cleveland, and I think despite their rough patch, as we talked about, all teams are going to have rough patches. I think Boston is finding a little bit of issues with the things. It's for another podcast, but I think I have a good sense of some of the issues that the Celtics are having. I still think that they're better than the Cavs. I think that the Celtics might be the easier matchup and a better matchup for the Knicks than the Cavs will be. I actually don't know how the Knicks stop the Cavs defense.
It's really interesting because the Cavs are almost they're almost entirely antithetical to what Boston does. Like, they run a ton of pick and roll, and not only do they run a ton of pick and roll, but they have, with what Kenny Atkinson has infused, more off-ball action and more off-ball movement than arguably any team in the league. You cannot, like, the Knicks want to, against pick and rolls, they want to play drop, and they want to have somebody on the back line waiting to help. That is like their ideal coverage. And if you have a guy like OG Anunoby, even as good an off-ball defender as he is, if his primary goal is to stunt on one of these rollers, and they have shooters on both the strong and weak corners waiting to move, they have a guy waiting to set a flare screen when they have their double big lineups. These are willing passers, and the Cavs have totally bought in to seeking out the best shot and not caring about the results. I know they lost a couple games in the road to the Rockets. That has not at all. I watched their game last night, or their last game against the Pistons, I think. Yeah, the Pistons. They have not at all been swayed or moved off of this idea that we only care about shot quality. We're just going to get the best shot all the time. I've heard Kenny Atkinson talk about it. Like, that's the number one thing he learned in Golden State is the value of shot quality on both ends. They do not care about the results. They are just going to keep launching. And I think the Knicks have a much better chance of stopping an ISO-heavy team that needs to create on-ball advantages to create its threes than a team that through ball movement and man movement and through its system is creating threes. Now, Kenny Atkinson, could he go to any team and across the regular season incentivize and push them to shoot threes? And could they be stopped in the playoffs if they don't have the right players? Absolutely. But to your point, Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell are both elite creators at the start of a possession. They will be on the court. One of them, if not both of them, will be on the court at all 48 minutes, and they will be surrounded by passers and screeners and shooters who are just going to keep shooting. I absolutely could see a world where the Cavs are a tougher matchup for the Knicks than the Celtics are. And it's just a really interesting point you brought up because it totally highlights the value of, okay, we are doing this thing against the Celtics. This is the approach we need that is optimal against the Celtics. You win 4 out of 7 games against the Celtics. You got to turn around and start from, this is not like build on that series. You're starting over and you got to do something totally new. That is how hard it is to win a championship. And this is why the things we talk about all season long, the thing you just brought up about using the regular season to try out different lineups. Which lineups are better for this switch heavy scheme? Which lineups are better for the drop where we have to rotate a bunch? It's not going to, unless you have like a super team, it's likely not going to be the same answer. And I don't want to, jump too far ahead, but you talked about, we're looking ahead and we're talking about these things that are important and maybe what the reason we could look back and say, where did it go wrong? I think that the lack of lineup experimentation could be where they look back and say, we didn't do enough to prepare ourselves to see which lineups are best, particularly related to Deuce McBride. Because even though Deuce's shooting overall has gone down from the elite level it was last season, his overall impact is as high as it's ever been. He's been great still on both sides of the ball, which is kind of nuts. Like, I think given his role on the Knicks, if somebody had told you at the start of the season that his 3-point shooting percentage was going to go from 43 to 36 or whatever it is, 35, you would say, oh, so he's like a below average player because he doesn't do enough. No, his offensive impact has still been good. He's still creating that gravity. He's still leading, the bench unit when Brunson's on the court. Guess who has the highest off-court number right now? The player on the Knicks who the Knicks do the best when he's on the court, Jalen Brunson. And that doesn't mean Jalen Brunson isn't good. It means the Knicks have actually been playing pretty well when Towns is on the court with Deuce. They've been holding up just fine, partially because Deuce is good. I think there are plenty of lineup combinations with Hart, with Bridges, with OG off the court that the Knicks could have been experimenting with Deuce in their spot that could help them in these playoff series that maybe they're not going to be prepared to utilize when the time comes.
I mean, I totally agree with that. And you talked about some of this whiplash from going from kind of series to series with different opponents and kind of figuring out which lineup is better against different approaches and different schemes. And I totally agree with you. I think that has to be, I don't want to say had to be because that's kind of morbid, but I think that had to be a real focus going into this season. I don't think it has been. I think the focus has been, how do we get our starting lineup going? How do we get different kinds of synergy with our starting lineup and get them a lot of experience? And I think that that's a fine goal, but I don't think that could be the only goal because, like you said, you're going from one team that plays this way to another team that plays this way. Even though everyone says that everyone does the same thing in the modern NBA, I guess maybe that's not the case. And like you talked about, like when we're talking about defending the Cavs and being in drop and the Knicks wanting to have someone on the back line, mostly OG Anunoby, get ready for the big-to-big passing for the Cavs when they have both bigs out there. Get ready for Allen to Mobley and Mobley to Allen alley-oops when you're trying to cover one of those guys who's rolling to the rim hard. And the Cavs prioritize short passing and very, very quick cuts off the ball and on the ball. That really just plays into their hands in a lot of ways. So I do think you have to figure out how you're going to stop these different lineups if you're going to win 4 series and win a championship. And make no mistake, that should be the Knicks' goal this season. So I think this was a really great conversation. For our viewers who are tuned in and have made it this far into the pod, I haven't gotten to do a ton of basketball watching. I haven't missed any Knicks games or anything like that. But I've been moving and a few things have been going on at my day job, so I've been kind of busy here, and I didn't get to prep as much as I normally do for the pod. But my thought was just, Geoff says interesting stuff constantly, so I'm just going to go wherever he takes me. And if he says something interesting, I'm going to press on that. That's why I think we were a little bit all over the place, but I think it ended up working out. We talked about some really cool stuff. So anything else you want to say, Geoff?
Yeah, I like that you clued them into me being like the sporadic crazy brain. Like that's you followed my lead, which is why we just bounced all over the place.
It was sick though. I think hopefully they agree. I thought we had some great conversations.
Yeah, and well heard by our listeners. It's never gonna get old to me.
Yeah, that's
like and subscribe, people.
That's gonna be some of the merch that'll just be for us, and our longtime listeners, the 5 people who listened to our first episode, will definitely appreciate that. I think that we covered a lot, but the Knicks are on a really good stretch right now, and they probably will keep it up, and we'll see if the minutes continue to stay kind of compressed and they continue to play well and get some of those bench lineups out there and see which combinations are really effective to save the guys for the playoffs. And we have some big matchups for the Knicks coming up, and we'll be here to cover all of it as we usually do. But until next time, for Geoff, I'm XJ, and this has been Hot Hand Theory.